This is the Voice of Motown podcast. I'm Tyler Pepe.
And I'm Brandon Cork, and this is a WVU sports podcast by two suffering WVU fans.
All right, so we mixed it up a little bit tonight, guys. We recorded 2 episodes, so if you haven't yet already, check out our Townsend episode, breaking down that game. But right now, we'll be breaking down the Thursday night matchup against the Virginia Tech Hokies. And to do that is our friend Giovanni. Thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Yeah. If you guys aren't familiar, Giovanni covers Virginia Tech, and you can find his social media account at All Things VT. And if you're like us and enjoy getting to know your opponent before the game, definitely check out his account because he has a ton of videos that'll help you understand what WVU is facing this Thursday, all kinds of highlights of Virginia Tech plays and just breaking it all down for you. So definitely check them out. And let's just jump right into it. Virginia Tech's pass rush and run defense has been great this year, but the opponents haven't been the most impressive. Can VT's defense keep them in this ball game, and do they have the ability to slow down West Virginia's potent offense?
As of now, based on the teams they've played against, is Old Dominion, Wofford, and Boston College. It's just not enough sample size to really know. This game will be their first test facing a real balanced offense with playmakers on the outside. Old Dominion, they're not at that level. Virginia Tech dominated defensively, and they ran the ball well on them. And BC, they have all offensive line struggles. So they're too one-dimensional. And Wofford, they're really just non-existent on offense. They hadn't scored a single point coming into the game. West Virginia will provide the biggest test possible to be the best quarterback they'll face, and just a solid run game, and the best wideouts by far. Virginia Tech will have faced. So far, the defense has held their own really well with favorable matchups, and they'll have to contain West Virginia because their offense just hasn't moved the ball efficiently. They haven't scored enough points. The most points they've scored this season is 27 points. So for them to win the game, the defense is going to be the reason why. They haven't proven to show that they can rely on their offense.
Yeah, I think without a doubt, the Hokies are probably the best defense West Virginia's played all year. Prior to this, I would say Pitt's the best defense we've played, and they do have a lot of talented players. But if you've seen what Pitt has done in the game since the backyard brawl, I mean, they have allowed a lot of points. And so, I think up to this point, VT could be the best defense that we've played thus far. What do you think, Brandon?
Yeah, I think VT definitely seems to be the best from front to back with Pitt. Their pass rush was great. They had an incredibly great defensive line, but it seems like, at least on paper, VT has, some really physical defensive backs, a good linebacking core, as well as a really solid defensive line. Just looking at VT kind of through the numbers, the one thing that does stick out to me is that, there might be some issues with Virginia Tech in tackling. I noticed they missed 14 tackles over the past 3 games, which comes out to about 13% of all tackles over the past 3 games. Do you see this as a big area of concern?
No, the tackling is actually much improved, believe it or not, from the last few years under Fuente. The tackling was dreadful. It was awful. One-on-one tackling wasn't there. The team was taking terrible angles. Secondary linebacker, the tackling was just some of the worst we've ever seen. And Brent Price changed that. The defense has much better technique. They're swarming to the ball. They're much more aggressive. So the tackling is actually much improved, but it will be tested. I saw Andy Bitter, who covers Virginia Tech for The Athletic. He wrote an article today, and it was titled that Virginia Tech's tackling will finally be tested against West Virginia. So it was much easier to tackle teams they're playing against. But I actually had a point I wanted to bring up. So regarding the Virginia Tech defense versus the West Virginia offense. Speaking of the Pitt games, Pitt's played West Virginia and Tennessee. So, I mean, those two teams alone may be better than Virginia Tech. They're much better offensively than Virginia Tech. And I was looking at that game from a defensive standpoint. So if that were to give Virginia Tech defense optimism. West Virginia wasn't. They scored 31 points. They weren't as effective as I thought. I see they went 23 for 40 for only 214 yards passing, and their rushing. They had 33 rushes for 190 yards. I expected them to have at least 250 yards rushing because they had some huge runs. So outside of the 3 or 4 large, just massive runs, they were contained fairly well in that game. I was surprised they only had 190. And then as far as the defensive line, Pitt had 3 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, and 7 QB hurries. Virginia Tech's going to need that or more in this game.
Oh, yeah.
Their defensive line is going to have to win the game. And then if you see the Kansas game, Kansas somehow was able to contain their run too. I see 38 rushes for 146 yards. That's completely shocking. I never thought Kansas could hold West Virginia at 146 yards. It's really
We
low.
didn't either.
Yeah.
Kansas is good though. But Kansas is good. I mean, they beat Houston too. Like they have a good team this year.
Yeah,
But-
without a doubt.
But
I
their
thought West
defense-
Virginia ran the ball well against Pitt. They were passing the ball well as well, so they kind of got away from the run a little bit. But I was shocked by Kansas. I mean, I know Kansas is good this year, and their offense can definitely control clock and put up points. But I'm still not super impressed with Kansas defense thus far this year. And the fact, I mean, we threw all over them, but the fact that we couldn't run the ball in Kansas, I did think was a little concerning. And, we have had offensive line issues in the past. So hopefully that doesn't rear its ugly head again. But VT is definitely going to be a huge test for our offensive line.
Yeah, and the big issue that we had with Kansas, too, was that our offense kind of got in its own way because of how bad our defense was doing. So, looking at VT, it kind of helps out a little bit that, at least on paper, it looks like VT doesn't have any sort of dynamic offensive weapon like a Jalen Daniels to take advantage of our defense and keep our defense on its heels. Because kind of what it seemed like was Neil Brown against Kansas was trying to do is he was trying to, take time off the clock. He was trying to run the ball a lot in the third quarter because he was trying to his defense a break, which probably wasn't the right move, but that's what ultimately hurt WVU in the end.
They should have won that game. I believe they would have used passes almost like runs, just short, just quick passes. Kansas secondary couldn't stop them. So even if it was just a 3 or 4 yard pass, they were better off doing that than continuing to run the ball and then just run the clock down, keep your defense off. Because Kansas quarterback, he's great. Every game, he's unbelievable. You need to keep him off the field. But West Virginia, with the right game plan, just high percentage passes, there's no way Kansas would have stood a chance. The time of possession would have been too lopsided.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir. We talked about that a lot last week. But speaking of our passing game, Virginia Tech's defensive backfield, on defense, they've been good so far this season. But Kathan Prather, Bryce Ford Wheaton, they may present a tough matchup for your secondary because both players are over 6'3". So how do you think Virginia Tech's secondary will handle that size and athleticism? Because West Virginia does have good wide receivers.
That'll probably be the matchup of the game. But West Virginia Tech's secondary is one of their strengths with Connor, with Chapman, with Peoples. So this will be the best wide receiving core they faced. The best wide receiver they faced was Flowers from Boston College, and his quarterback didn't have a whole lot of time to throw, but he made a few plays, and he had one huge play on a double move. But he's only just one guy. Looking at Pry in the past with Penn State, his corners aren't really that tall in general. They're just very physical. So what I've seen from West Virginia games is a lot of times their receivers at the line of scrimmage, they aren't touched, and they're just free runs, and they easily just beat the defense. So I think they'll be more physical in this game and try to jam them and just play tight. And it's going to come down to tackling. I've seen a lot of runs with West Virginia. If they're not the deep ball, it's really short routes that they break into huge plays. So it'll come down to tackling. But I see Pry calling the defense, the corners, to be physical against West Virginia, and the defensive line's gonna have to help. Whether it's a blitz, if Daniels has too much time, it's gonna be over. This game will get out of hand.
So when we
for
played
sure.
Pitt, they brought a lot of pressure, zero coverage. They just left their corners on an island, and Daniels did have some success, especially throwing up the Bryce Ford Wheaton. Is that how VT gets their pressure in? Is it a lot of zero coverage?
No, not they blitz a lot with corners actually, and they I don't know if they'll do that in this game because the receivers are just too potent, but they probably uses linebackers really well in blitzes. But against the opposition they faced, which is very low, especially considering Boston College's offensive line problems, the defensive line has had their way, so they really haven't needed to do a whole lot. The defensive line has been very dominant.
I noticed that Virginia Tech, just going through like the different PFF grades they have for different defensive players on your team, there are a lot of, it seems like, really good edge rushers that even if they're not getting sacks, they're generating pressures. So it's kind of about who Virginia Tech's best and most impactful defensive player is. So is there one guy, or is there a few guys that WVU should worry about?
This season has really just been as a unit. The defense has completely changed under Pry, and these aren't his players. And that's what makes me optimistic about Pry as a head coach. They need to figure out the offense, but defensively, they're night and day from what we've seen recently. I don't think he recruited any of these guys. I don't think he did at all, really. But their best linebacker so far has been Dax Hollifield. He's a lot of experience. He's looked like a completely different player. Stopping the run, in coverage, he's everywhere. So he's changed a lot. And then Pollard, a defensive tackle, he's been disruptive every single game. And Garboot, also on the D-line, they line him up wherever you want. And he's just been really effective at creating pressure. And then it's just the secondary. The secondary has been dominant. Their technique's a lot better. Their blitzing has done really well, and their tackling has just improved. So it's just as a unit, it's been shocking how quickly they've grasped the defense and just how it's worked. They bought in.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see that matchup because, I mean, that's Virginia Tech's best strength and that's West Virginia's best strength is, so we're going to see that offense and defense go up against each other. But let's flip to the other side of the ball. Virginia Tech's offense, they don't exactly light up the scoreboard, and that is, their offense is their weakness, but our defense is our weakness. So, do you think they can put up points against our spotty West Virginia defense?
They struggled against Boston College. That's for sure. So the best defense they faced is Boston College. And some people will say that they took an early lead, which they did. They were up immediately off an interception. And the offensive coordinator might have changed his play calling because they were up 10 or up 17 pretty fast. But the rest of the way, they were shut down. The run game was shut down. Boston College punted 10 times. They couldn't do anything on offense. And yet Virginia Tech punted 7 times. And they really just couldn't do anything against Boston College. They had one huge run by King. I think it was a 64-yarder. And that was really it. I mean, Holston had about 20 carries and very few yards. They just weren't going anywhere. West Virginia, defensively, their defensive line is very good. So I could see them creating a lot of pressure. This offensive line isn't really a strength of the team. They needed to address it a lot more in the offseason, and they chose not to.
Yeah, and if we're gonna have any success on defense, sorry, go ahead, Brandon.
So talking about the, focusing a little bit on someone who might be a little bit familiar with the WVU fans is Grant Wells, who is a West Virginia native and transfer from Marshall. While he was a little bit turnover happy at Marshall, he did have a bad game to begin the season for Virginia Tech, but the past couple games seems like he's improved a little bit. So what do you think of Grant Wells at quarterback? Do you think he can turn around and have a good season? And are you happy to have Wells on the team?
So the fan base in general, with a new staff, they have Brown and Wells at quarterback, and that's a huge upgrade from when they had last season. Last season, they had Braxton Burmeister, who's now at San Diego State, and he really hasn't done a whole lot. They had Blumrick, who's now a tight end, who's a very effective tight end, by the way, but he was not a quarterback, especially not at this level. And they had Knox Kadum last season, who was an FCS quarterback at best. He was a JMU commit. So having Wells, he's experienced, I have him down as he had 3,535 yards and 444 pass attempts at Marshall. So he's had good production. It seems like he fits the system that Bowen, the offensive coordinator, is trying to implement. But I don't think Bowen knows what he has to work with yet, believe it or not. He's still trying out running backs, still trying out wide receivers, and it's just more so whoever makes a play is playing. He's just trying to see what he's inherited. They didn't really bring enough help wide receiver. They brought in Jaden Blue from Temple. He looked a lot better against Wofford. That's the only game he's really shown up. They brought in a wide receiver, Gosnell from North Carolina. He really hadn't played at all there, but he's looked a lot better. He's consistently had a couple catches a game, 2 or 3. But as far as Grant Wells, he seems to fit what they want to do, so it's a good start. Some fans aren't as enthusiastic about him. Maybe the OC is not either, honestly, because against Old Dominion, they came out firing. They're running the ball really well, but Wells, they started throwing the ball excessively, and he had too many turnovers, and they just weren't able to convert. They really just couldn't score against Old Dominion. They'd move the ball. They did have a lot of penalties, but they would move the ball, and they just really just couldn't get touchdowns. Against Boston College, they did their absolute best to limit him from creating any turnovers, which says a lot. And against Wofford, he threw for 300-plus yards, but they couldn't score any points. They only scored 27 points against Wofford. So the play calling has really changed. They're more running oriented, and I don't see them throwing 35-plus times again. I don't think they just trust them. They're just trying to have high percentage passes and run the ball, and let's have the defense keep us in it, and let's win.
Yeah, the one thing that really stuck out to me about Grant Wells so far, looking at his numbers, is that, he's really good off play action. He seems to love throwing intermediate passes in between 10 and 20 yards. So off play action, he's at a 77% completion percentage for 241 yards, a touchdown and an interception, 26 attempts. In the intermediate game, he's completing 87.5% of his passes, 14.7 yards per attempt with 2 touchdowns, no picks. It's only 16 attempts, but still, it seems like that area of the field is something that works for him. And, talking about WVU's defense, our secondary is our weakness. So it's going to be interesting to see how that matchup turns out, especially if he can get our safeties, our young and experienced safeties, to bite on play action and hit him over the top.
But that's my issue with the offense is
they won't do it.
Their wide receivers, there's no one who's really that explosive at all. They're just possession receivers, almost all of them. The best one's Caleb Smith, and he's good. He had a big play against Boston College, but it's really just nothing but possession receivers, just short 7-yard receptions, good route running, really good hands, much better hands than I thought. But everything is short, just really short, quick reads. There's absolutely no one who is like a real X factor, a real playmaker. So that can also be an issue with Wells and the play calling.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this game might just come down to turnovers because Virginia Tech, they just want to take care of the ball. As you guys mentioned, Wells had 4 interceptions that first game, and he's really taken care of the ball the last 2. You don't exactly lay up the scoreboard doing that, but they have won their last 2 games in doing so. So I think it's going to come down to how West Virginia's defensive front can apply pressure to Wells and that offensive line, because they've only allowed 2 sacks on Wells and 11 pressures for the year. And that's, pretty solid 3 games in. And so, and West Virginia's defense has not been real, they haven't created a ton of turnovers thus far. So, I mean, I think if they can get into Wells' head and maybe force a couple bad throws and capitalize on them, I think that'll go a long way and possibly leading to a West Virginia victory.
Well, the offensive line against Wofford, there were several plays where he had 5+ seconds to throw because it's Wofford. But yet they couldn't run the ball well. I mean, he had so much time to throw. He could have just ran. Everyone was open, but they still just couldn't. Like I said, they couldn't convert touchdowns. They could move the ball like they did against Old Dominion, but it's not turning into touchdowns. They have a good kicker. Unfortunately, we found that out too soon. But as far as offensive line, they should be rated high because of the quick passes that Bowen calls. He doesn't need that much time. Wells, it's just really just quick outs, really quick reads, under 7 yards max. There's nothing that's really requires a lot of protection. But the protection overall has been reasonably well against the competition they faced. It's just more so the run game sometimes hasn't been as effective as they expect, and it's just leading to nonstop punts.
Yeah, and that's one thing that kind of struck me, and it seems like the scheme is to get, like you said, get the ball out quick, and that's bolstering the pass protection stats. But the PFF stats are not favorable to the run blocking. It looks like every starting lineman except for one has a 57 grade or lower per PFF overall. So well below average, but they're a really run heavy team. So do you view that the O-line is the problem when it comes to the running game, or is this a schematic issue?
It's a new staff, a new play caller, and as I mentioned, he just doesn't have the most reliable wide receivers. There's just no one who's really that explosive, and that's the issue. So you can move the ball with that, but when you're trying to convert and get touchdowns, it's just a lot more difficult once you get inside the red zone, as what happened against Wofford of all teams. As far as the offensive line, though, but yeah, we're right. Considering they're a running team, I have down against BC, they ran the ball for 144 yards on 45 attempts.
Jeez,
that's no good. And
No.
one run was for 64 yards. One run, so it didn't run very well. And against Wofford, 133 yards rushing out of 41 attempts, so that's 3.2 yards per rush. So they just need to open up the offense a little more. I think a lot of it is play calling too. They run the ball up the middle for about 3 yards far too often. We just haven't seen the playbook open up or diversity in the run game. It's just too many runs up the middle. When they run on the edge, they have a lot more success. So when they have linemen pulling, every time they have the offensive line moving, other than forward, they run the ball a lot better, a hell of a lot better. But coming into the season, for me, they needed to address the wide receiver more than they did, and they needed more offensive line help. And we'll see it throughout the season. Offensive line, they don't have much depth, and it's not a great offensive line to begin with. But they should have added more receivers who had good experience and can just help immediately stretch the field a little bit.
Yeah, speaking of the
like,
runners, Keyshawn King is your leading rusher, but he's injured. I tried looking it up. Will he miss the game on Thursday? And if so, can your backups, Jalen Holston and Chance Black, can they carry the load for that offense?
They cannot. No, Holston has been almost like a workhorse, but not getting very far. He's just not very explosive. He's just not the guy. Black was a young player, and I'm glad Price trying to play young players unlike Fuente, and he's looked pretty good. But they're just not explosive enough right now. They need King. Against Wofford, there were a few runs that King would have taken all the way. He's just a lot faster, more of a home run back. They're missing Malachi Thomas, who can just really do it all. He hasn't played all season. He won't play in this game either. But they desperately need King. They'll probably call up different plays if King plays. They'll be more interested in running outside, using him in the pass game. He just can do more. Holston requires his blocking to be great. He doesn't do a whole lot on his own. Against BC, King was injured, though, so he only had 4 carries. But Holston, they didn't really do anything yards-wise. Wasn't very effective.
So overall, it sounds like it's kind of a kind of a mixed bag with on the defensive side, and Prize influence. Virginia Tech is really kind of coming along, but the offense is kind of stagnating. So, even though we're only 3 games into the season, how do you feel that VT fans feel so far about Brent Pry and his tenure so far?
Optimism is high. Fuente just left on a bitter note. He's literally the opposite of Fuente. Fuente really just had no interest in being in Virginia to begin with, nor recruiting in Virginia. So the talent wasn't as good, it started to dissipate. And the offenses were stagnant the recent years under Fuente. He's an offensive coach. Fuente really had no interest in embracing just the history of Virginia Tech and former players and just the alums, everyone who really matters. It just didn't work out. He wasn't invested in recruiting locally. I'm pretty sure once season was over, he'd leave immediately. He had no interest. And Pry is opposite. Pry, I was happy about Pry being hired. He was one of my options. And that's because I follow Penn State so much because he has experience in the area, especially recruiting. He was a graduate assistant in Virginia Tech in the 90s. So he saw the rise of Virginia Tech. But for me, it was just Penn State's defenses were great, and James Franklin recruits really well in Virginia. So the connections were just already there with Pry. And for me personally, and a lot of fans in general share that sentiment, they wanted Virginia Tech to restore the defense and just have a defensive first approach because that's what's worked here. And if you see the way the defense has played, again, without his players, without his recruits, he's completely just changed the defensive mindset. They're far more aggressive, more physical. They actually want to tackle, and just the mindset is just completely different. So once he brings in his guys, his defense is going to take off even further. But yeah, he's a great fit for Virginia Tech for sure. You could tell he genuinely wants to be there. He's been there before, and it was the right job. It took the right job for him to leave Penn State. He was having tremendous success there, and you could see he's invested in recruiting. He and his whole staff, like he actually wants this. He wants to win.
Yeah, that actually sounds like a lot of parallels to West Virginia's situation. A lot of people criticize Dana Holgorsen for not embracing WVU's culture, and he didn't recruit well in state, whereas Brown did kind of bring back all those former players, and he recruits well in West Virginia. But I saw the other day Brent Pry took a shot at Fuentes. Something about his kid was cleaning out a room and Fuentes didn't take all of his stuff with him. Something along those lines. But it's not too often you see your current coach taking just right out in the open shots at your former one. So do you guys like that? I mean, I'm sure you do, because I don't, like you were kind of alluding to, a lot of people didn't like Fuentes as he was walking out the door. So I'm sure you didn't mind it.
Outside of the buyout, the fans wanted Fuente out years prior. I mean, his tenure was a disaster towards the end. They had some of the worst losses. I was at the Duke loss, I think it was 2018. They're just run completely over. I mean, the defense completely was just starting to fall off. He had some success. He lost a lot of close games too, really close games at the end, unfortunately. The Kentucky game comes to mind, and 2 Notre Dame games come to mind. 2020, they lost to Miami by a single point. They should have won that game, but no. Fuentes, no one wants anything to do with him or his offensive coordinator, Brad Cornelsen, in this area. It was just a complete failure. They alienated Virginia recruiting. I mean, he was trying to do his best without recruiting locally. I just think he's one of those head coaches who isn't fully invested in recruiting. He treats it like he just wants to recruit almost like quarterly or when it benefits him. And that's just not how recruiting works today. It's just a year-round process. And he just wasn't interested. And Brent Pry already has recruited. He's emphasizing Virginia. He's not getting the top 10 guys yet, but he's recruiting a lot of his classes, local players. And that's how you win here. And that's how you'll always win here, consistently.
Yeah, I mean, you always got to get the local kids. And like I said, I mean, that's been a big thing that we've even said in our own state, because Dana would let a lot of the big-time West Virginia recruit guys walk. And it seems like Brown's getting a majority of them. And so obviously people love that. But another cool storyline for this game is Doug Nestor's making his first trip back to Virginia Tech since he's transferred out of there to WVU. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's any bitterness on either side there, but it's just neat that he's going back there to play against his former team. And, you know, I'm sure that's going to put a little pep in his step because everyone always wants to go back to their former team and put on a big performance.
Yeah, that was a bigger storyline last season through Fuente because he left his program. Mm-hmm. But I think there's just a clear division now between what Fuente did and what Pry's doing. I think it's just a clean slate. They don't want anything to do with Fuente, and everyone's glad he's gone. But as far as Doug Nestor, I mean, he was a casualty of what Fuente likes to do. He doesn't like playing young players. So Nestor was looking for more playing time, and he went back home. And there were a lot of players under Fuente that left. Look at Hendon Hooker. He left. Look how he's doing against Tennessee. They've lost so many players. Tavion Robinson, he went to Kentucky. He just had a good game. He had recruited a lot of players from Texas and a Texas to VT movement, and that completely flopped. They left. But I don't think it'll be a storyline in this game. I don't think it just has nothing to do with Pry, so I don't think it'll matter. But he would have started. He was supposed to be a future starter. He just didn't want to necessarily wait his turn per se. He wanted to play now, and he probably should have.
No, I'm sure he's a good player.
In college football today, you just can't assume the player is going to remain. You have to play him. So,
and I think
rotating him out though, but he was playing him, but just wasn't enough. But you know that's Fuente's issue. He didn't like playing young guys, and if you made a mistake, he puts you in the doghouse, so to speak, and we don't see you again. So Pry doesn't do that at all. So we'll be able to retain players a lot more efficiently.
And I think that was a big factor in Nestor's original Virginia Tech is that whenever Nestor originally committed to VT was whenever Holgerson was at WVU. And as we kind of mentioned, you know, Holgerson kind of really didn't put too much effort into embracing the state and the culture and, you know, the kids that come from the state. So, you know, once Dana left, it seemed like Neil kind of, you know, rebuilt some of those bridges that Dana burned. And, you know, it just kind of seemed like a perfect time for Doug Nestor to come back. And, you know, it's interesting because our offensive line right now, 3 West Virginia natives starting for us, Nestor, Frazier, and so, you know, it's a good group. It's getting better. But, you know, it's always nice to have those little storylines and, you know, kind of the little nuggets of facts that come around with it. So looking kind of big picture, how many games do you see Virginia Tech winning this year? Do you think they'll be bowl eligible?
Unfortunately, they lost the Old Dominion, a game they completely dominated. Lost the lead late with about a couple minutes to go in the game. I still see them winning at least 6 games. I'd say about 7 games without the ODU win. I just think the way they play defense, we'll see how good their defense truly is when they face North Carolina, when they face West Virginia, NC State, I'm sure. But against the weaker teams, at least, the Duke, Georgia Tech, Virginia, this defense is just too physical for them. They're gonna have a hard time moving the ball on this defense. It's just the secondary is aggressive. The D line is it's a problem. So, but like I said, we don't know what the ceiling is until they start facing the better teams. They're going to face Miami. So the North Carolina game will prove a lot to see if they could truly pressure the quarterback. They're going to have to in that game. But there are a lot of, so to speak, weaker teams. Georgia Tech is awful. So there's some easy wins there.
Yeah, Georgia Tech.
With their schedule, you really can win playing defense this way. I mean, these guys, it's just the whole mentality is different. So that's the reason why I wanted Pry or a defensive-minded coach in general to take over Fuente, because in the ACC, there's only a handful of teams that truly play defense, like NC State, Clemson. There's really not a whole lot. Pitt plays defense. So you could win that way here, and they will. I'd say they win about 7.
That seems like a pretty good number for a first-year head coach. So, I mean, I'm sure V Tech fans think that's, all right. I'm sure they're not going to throw their hands up and be upset with 7 wins this year. But you got a prediction for the game, score, and who wins?
Yeah, I'll be at the game. I'm hoping Virginia Tech wins, but based on what we've seen from the offense, until they can prove they can score more touchdowns and control time of possession, as of now, I have to go with West Virginia, just scoring too many for this offense, or scoring enough, I should say, around 27-21, 27-20. For Virginia Tech to win, they'd have to force turnovers. They'd have to win field possession. They'd have to convert on third downs. And, when the offense gets a short field, they have to score a touchdown. When I played against Boston College, on the second play of the game, I believe, there was an interception. Virginia Tech made a touchdown. And if they get any turnovers, it just has to be 7 points. They can't settle for field goals. And defensively, if West Virginia's moving the ball well, the defense just has to buckle down and force field goals. West Virginia's going to move the ball. They're going to have a lot of chances because Virginia Tech's offense just isn't there. But at the end of the day, the defense is going to have to maybe give up 2 touchdowns max and just force field goals and just get them off the field. But if the offense is efficient, they can win the game. Their offense, their goal needs to be time possession. It just really does. None of the tempo that they like to run, snapping the ball with a lot of time left. Just wind the clock down and just make high percentage play calls and just kill the game that way and just hope your defense can hold it.
Yeah, I think a lot of Mountaineer fans are thinking this game's a win. And that's because, Virginia Tech's offense hasn't played well. But I'll admit, not until I started digging and really looking up how they've performed, this defense is pretty scary to go up against. And we're on the road in a tough environment. I think it will be close, but I'll go 27-20. West Virginia pulls away. But without a doubt, the thing that's going to decide this game is turnovers. And West Virginia has lost these type of close rivalry games purely based on turnovers these last couple of years. You look at Maryland last year, Pitt this year, and if they don't take care of the ball, V-Tech could definitely walk away with a victory here. But I'll pick my Mountaineers to just barely squeak by 27-20. Brandon, what do you got for this game?
Yeah, I'm thinking right around the same range. I think originally I was thinking maybe like a 27-17 game, but maybe like a 27-23 if it's a field goal heavy game for Virginia Tech. The one thing that West Virginia really needs to protect itself from is just boneheaded plays that kind of make you scratch your head. Like I'm thinking the Bryce Ford Wheaton drop against Pitt, the Reese Smith muff punt. I mean, those were backbreakers at crucial times of the game. We really need to buckle down on our discipline. No penalties in the red zone. So there's a lot of issues with WVU just kind of breaking down at the wrong time. And I worry against a high pressure defense like Virginia Tech, our offensive line or our receivers could buckle at the wrong time and really hurt us. So I'm hoping that WVU can at least take a nice little lead going into the fourth quarter and let Virginia Tech maybe chip away at it and win that way. But if it gets close, I worry that we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot and find a way to lose.
See, because my issue with Virginia Tech, so against Boston College, they completely dominated the game. They were up 17-0, and it felt like it was at least 30-0. And next thing you know, the game is 17-10. 17-10. The offense just couldn't do anything. They tried to sit on the lead and win 17-10, and they let them back in the game. When Boston College made it 17-10, then Virginia Tech had to actually sustain a drive. So they had a long drive, and they made a touchdown, make it 24-10, and that was the game. But if they have that kind of game plan against West Virginia, it's just they have no shot. Like that 17 will turn into a deficit pretty soon. You can't punt that many times. You can't play conservative. So, unless they're getting first downs and just winding down the clock, it's just the only way. So that's my issue is, if they have a lot of success early and take the lead, it can't be 13-0 or 10-3. Their offense is just too explosive. They need to turn that into 20-7. They need to score TDs. So until I see it, I'll believe it, when I see it. So we'll see.
The stakes are so high in this game too for Neil Brown and the Mountaineers. Not only is it a big rivalry game, but I mean, if you start this year 1-3, if he thought it was bad after that Kansas game, everyone's going to be writing articles, typing stuff on social media, and just be coming for Neil Brown's job, because not only is 1-3 just a bad start, but after this Virginia Tech game, it is just an absolute gauntlet of tough games. I mean, you got Texas on the road after that. Then you got Baylor at home, who's no cupcake, and just so many games that they're going to be tough to win. Virginia Tech's offense is down this year. He absolutely has to walk away with this victory. And that might not seem fair because Virginia Tech's one of the toughest places to go to on a Thursday night and play. But the way I see it is Neil Brown has backed himself into this corner. So it's up for him to claw his way out, because this is
it really depends which West Virginia team shows up, because the one that played against Pittsburgh wasn't the same team that played against Kansas.
Yeah,
at least not defensively. The mistakes they made against Kansas, I mean, at times the defensive line and linebackers, there was too many breakdowns. There's no one near the ball. So, if they play the way they did against Pitt, they'll win plenty of games in the Big 10, in the Big 12. It's not even close. Their offense is too good. Their D line is good enough. But against Kansas, I think they underestimated Kansas. And then when the game got close, they made the muff punt, led to another touchdown, and they just didn't manage the game well. Like you said, they tried to run the game, run the ball excessively, and it wasn't working. And they just wouldn't get out of that. And if they just passed, they could have passed every down and controlled the game, every single down.
100%.
And it was just a huge. It was a play calling issue, and they had some penalties, but the turnovers hurt them. They just didn't manage that game well. The Pitt game, Pitt is really good. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw him play against Tennessee. It was a great game. In the Pitt game, as you guys mentioned, let's your guys' podcast. The fourth and one with about 6 minutes to go. The way they were running the ball, he should have just went for it. He decided to punt. They tied it up. The way they were running the ball, it wasn't even a yard. It was less than a yard. They would have easily gotten that and just ended the game. But the way they've looked, if they play like they do in the Pitt game, they'll win plenty of games in the Big 12. They have a lot. The talent's there, and if the defense just tightens up, especially in the run game, they're right there. I mean, Kansas State lost to Tulane.
Yeah.
Kansas State play. Their quarterback, he's played at Nebraska. They don't trust him throwing the ball. They can't throw the ball. He runs, Vaughn runs. They're really not that good. I've seen them play. They're very, very average offensively. And Texas Tech just played NC State, who is very good, and NC State had no problem beating them. I mean, there's several teams other than Oklahoma. Texas lost their quarterback. They were struggling against UTSA last week. This is a good time for West Virginia to play them. The first half.
That's one thing with Neil Brown is that he kind of coach up and coach down to the different opponents that we have. I mean, hopefully Kansas is a wake up call that he can't do that, because, I look at last year against Oklahoma, where Oklahoma was really good and we lost 14-7. But I never expected them to keep it that close. And then what was it, a week or 2 weeks later, we go in against at home against Texas Tech, and we go down 17-0 at half and end up, still losing, even though our offense finally woke up in the second half. But it's just kind of a trend with Neil Brown of how he kind of approaches games. I don't know if it's necessarily his approach, but the people that he puts on his staff and puts in charge of preparation. And, it's just that I think that's why there's so much pressure on Neil Brown and, his crew for this game, is to prove that, if there's a team that you have an advantage over, leverage it and actually go out there and win the game like you should. So it's going to be interesting for sure.
Yeah. And, that Oklahoma game, I think it was like 16-13, because I remember on that when we were driving, we could have won it. And then, of course, bad turnover, and then that led to us losing, which seems to be a theme lately. But anyways, this is going to be a big game. But kind of just to wrap all of this up, what's everyone's favorite WVU versus VTech game, or just memory in general? Because there's been a lot of memorable ones on both sides, honestly.
So for me, I mean, pretty young, but it was the 99 game. I believe West Virginia had about 4 or 5 wins. They weren't really having a good year.
Yep, I was at that game.
And Virginia Tech, I think they were about 8-0. And that they were ranked 3rd. Florida State was ranked 1st. Penn State was ranked 2nd. And I believe that very day, Penn State lost. So I started getting the news that Penn State lost. So if Virginia Tech won that game, they would move up to number 2. And it's just one of those games where you throw the records out, and it's just this rivalry. West Virginia played like they were undefeated. It was a great game. I remember West Virginia scoring late with about maybe 1 minute and 30 seconds left or 2 minutes left, and they went for 2, and they didn't get it, and they were up 2019. And then they drove down the field, and Graham hit about a 44-yard field goal, and it was a hell of a game. So I was very young, but I started watching it, paying attention, especially in the second half, because we didn't think it was going to be close, so we didn't really care. But when we started to see how close the game was, started paying attention in the second half. But that was a great game.
Yeah, I was like 11 years old. That was my first or second Mountaineer game I ever went to. Were you there with us, Brandon?
I don't remember if I was at that one or not. Maybe not.
I remember it being a heartbreaker.
Yeah.
What's your favorite game?
Oh, mine? My favorite was I forget which year it was, but it was the one that you posted the clip of today with the Brian King interception in the end zone.
2002.
Yeah.
My dad actually took us down to Blacksburg for that game. I skipped school. We went down there. We didn't have tickets. We ended up meeting up on the street with an alumni from Virginia Tech. They were selling their tickets. We ended up getting seats like 2 rows behind the West Virginia bench in the Virginia Tech alumni section. And that was my first time and only time in Lane Stadium. And it was just fun. I mean, the environment, watching WVU pull out the win. It was just a great experience, especially with the way they won that goal line stand. I know that was kind of emblematic of the Nealon era of defense and ball control and all of that. So that one is definitely top on my list.
Yeah, that's probably mine as well. And a close honorable mention would be the following year in 2003, where what was Virginia Tech, like number 3, and they came into Morgantown and West Virginia won. I think it was 24-7 or 31-7. And that memorable play to Terrence Garvin for like 93 yards from Rasheed Marshall. Definitely those 2 games are the ones that always stick out to me for sure.
The 2017 game was good too. I mean, there wasn't much defense at all. That was Virginia Tech, just defense being optional. But that game, I went to that game. It was at the Redskins or the Commanders.
Yeah,
Landover.
FedEx Field.
I was at that game at Landover. It was just back and forth. I think it was like 10-10, 17-17, 24-24. It was just back and forth. It was a great game. 31-24, I think was the final. But it was tied so many times. It was like a basketball game. And of course, both teams they didn't play any defense at all. But it was an exciting game.
And that was a memorable one for Mountaineer fans because I believe that was Will Greer's first game as a Mountaineer. And he tore up, so that made us all excited, even though we lost. Of course, that stunk, but of course, I mean, we were excited for the potential of Will Greer, and he, of course, had a pretty good career here.
Yeah, he was great. I followed the season where they were ranked. I think it was like top 5, top 10 for sure. He was just unstoppable.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I mean, that's all I got. You guys got anything else to add in at the end here?
I don't have anything.
I think West Virginia they're still trying to find their identity. Sometimes their wide receivers are very dominant and they're deep and they pass the ball sometimes excessively. Other times their run game, they have a lot of success running the ball, probably because defenses are more concerned with their wideouts, that they have too much success running the ball and they start running the ball too much and they stop passing. They just don't have a good balance. And if they find the right balance in a game-to-game situation, it all depends on how the game is going. They could win 8 games easily. It's just they just have to be able to the way that game is going, the way defenses are playing them, they just need to realize like what's working. Let's stick with it. You can't have like a predetermined, this is what we're going to do. If they make the right adjustments in games, they'll be fine. Sometimes, I guess it hurts to have too many weapons.
Yeah,
keep it simple.
All the pieces are there. Hopefully it comes together because, although a lot of people are calling for Neil Brown's head, I don't think anyone who roots for WVU wants to see that, because that means you got to start all over. That means you're going to lose a lot of recruits. So, if he can just turn the season around, win 7 or 8 games, that would honestly be the best case scenario for every fan and everyone in the program.
The reality is they have the talent to do it.
Oh, yeah.
If he doesn't, they're going to lose some players next season. So,
yeah,
it's just they have a really good team, dude. Like, it's hard to have a college team with loaded running backs, a really good quarterback, one of the top quarterbacks, and a multiple wide receivers. This is college. Like, it's hard to find that balance. So, they're just not sure how many runs. It's almost like they're trying to make sure the running backs get X amount of carries, and it's just not how you play. You go with what's working. I think they should be a pass-first team, and that should open up the run, and they'll win a ton of games. But sometimes they don't see it that way. They want to just establish the run. Like, there's some Big Ten team. They're trying to run the ball sometimes, but they have Dodge as quarterback. It's like, you got Daniels. Like, use him. Use him. Or Deggy.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just start running the ball like he's back, and it's like, you got Daniels back there. Let's take advantage of that.
Yeah, he's your best player. Give him the keys to the car and just let him win you a game. I'm with you. All right, guys. Well, hey, let's wrap this up. Thank you for everyone listening. Giovanni, thanks for joining us, man. Appreciate it. Gave us a lot of good insight to the Virginia Tech team, and I'm pumped for the game.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. Catch you next time.